friends, it's Christy. Welcome back to my channel. Today I'm going to be making a card using Lawn Fawn's Mermaid for You, Ocean Shell-fie, You Are Sublime, and Fintastic Friends. So I've stamped those images on Catherine Pooler Favorite White cardstock with Lawn Fawn Jet Black ink, and I'll be coloring with my Copic markers. I'm starting with my mermaid's skin, and I'm using E000, E00, and E11. Going to place some shadow up under her hairline, on her face, on the underside of her arms, and the top of her little bikini top, and also on the sides of her waist. And then I'll blend out with the other two shades. Then I'll come in and give her some rosy cheeks using R20 and R22. And while I'm at it, I'm going to give all of my other critters some rosy cheeks. You can do this before or after you color the rest of them. And so I just decided to do it now while I have those markers out. At first I thought I wasn't going to need the R11, which I often do use with this combination, but I ended up deciding that I did want it there. I just wanted to soften the edges of those rosy cheeks a little bit more, and that R11 is perfect for that. Then I'll move on to her hair, and I'm going to use E50, E51, and E53. And since she is a more simply drawn image, I am going to just go straight in with my darkest shade, the E53, and add some of that to the ends of her hair. And I am pulling that in toward the part. I'll confess that I do find it so much harder to color hair on these more simply drawn images when there are no guidelines of where to put your darks and your lights than I do if it's like a super complicated braid or like a messy bun or anything like that. I feel like this is so much harder for me to achieve results that I actually like. But that's okay. It's still a work in progress, but I did bring in a little bit of E55 in there because I just felt like it needed some depth, and then I blended that out in the reverse. And then I'm going to use these same shades for my hermit crab's shell, but I am only using the lighter 3 shades for the main part of the shell. And then I'll bring in E57 and start to add some little dark spots on there just to give that shell some interest. And I'll blend that out with the E55 just to soften the edges a little bit. And I did decide that I wanted one more little patch in that second section over on the right. So I just went back and added that. Next, I'll bring in BG72, BG75, and BG78 for my mermaid's tail. I'm going to start with that BG78 on the underside, which is the left, and then blending out toward the right with the BG75, and then I'll fill in with the BG72. And then I am going to use these same shades for the 2 plants that are over on the far right, but I'm going to start with the BG72 and just fill them in completely. Then I'll go in with my darkest shade, that BG78, and I'll just add a little touch on the base of each leaf closest to the stem, just to darken that up a little bit, create some interest. And then once I have that laid in, I'll come in with the mid-tone, which is the BG75, and just blend that out slightly. And I'm not going to go back in with my highlight shade. I'm just going to leave it as is so that we have that nice bit of contrast with the lightness on the ends. And then I'm going to add BG70 into the mix, and I'm going to do my little angelfish using BG72 and the BG70. So I put my BG72 down at the bottom and then blend it up with the BG70. The BG70 is a barely there shade that I often use for fairy wings or glass jars, bees wings, things like that. It's super, super pale, but it blends nicely with that BG72, especially if you do a second layer to kind of smooth things out. So that's what I'm doing to just provide a little bit of contrast. And I have to say, I love the way that these fish turned out. I think the color is so gorgeous. It's like the exact shade of my craft room walls. I also use those same two shades for the little pearl headband. And then I'm going to move on to some dusty pinks. I'm using R81, R83, and R85. And I'm going to color in my octopus, starting with that R85, and since the octopus is facing toward the right, I'm going to place my shadows on the left, on the back of the head, and I'm also going to place them on the top of the arms because I wanted those to be a little bit lighter on the underside. So not for shadow reasons, but just the coloring of the octopus. I just wanted the tentacles to be lighter on the underside. So once I have that R85 laid in, I'm going to blend out with the R83, and I just carefully colored around all of the little spots on the top of the head because I want to do those in a contrasting color. And I am going to finish that off and then come in with the R81. And I realized that I wanted to go even lighter on the face, so I'm going to leave a little bit of room there for that, but I will fill in the tentacles with that R81. And then the lighter shade that I'm going to bring in is RV00, and I'll just blend that along the edge of that R81 until that's filled in nicely. Then I'm also going to use these shades for the Little Mermaid's top, just the darkest three shades there. So I started with the R85, blended out with the R83, and finished with the R81. And I will do one of my plants with this combo. Then for the stripes on my angelfish, I'm going to use the lightest three shades. So I'm starting with the R83 down at the bottom, blending up with the R81, and then using the RV00 for the highlight. I'm going to switch to another dusty pink combo. This one is a little bit more purple leaning, and that is RV91, RV93, and RV95. And I'm going to color in my jellyfish. So I'm using that RV95 for a little darkness on the right side. It could have gone either way since he's facing completely forward, but I just decided to put it on the right since he's going to go toward the right side of the card. I'm also going to do the spots on the top of my octopus's head in this combo and another one of the coral plants. And I'll also do the tiny little starfish. I purposely chose a limited color palette for this card in kind of dusty, muted, desaturated shades because I just thought it was kind of interesting for an underwater card. I just recently did another mermaid card that had some really bright, vibrant colors, so I just wanted to go in a different direction for this one. Next, I'm going to bring in some blue, and I'm going to use B91, B93, and B95. Starting with the B95, I'm going to color in my little crab. I'm going to blend out with the B93 and then fill in with the B91, although I quickly realized that I would have liked that to just have a little bit more of a soft blue tint. So I'm going to bring in B00 and just go over that B91 a little bit, try to lighten that. And then I'll use that with the rest of this combo for the other images that I'm doing with it. So I'm going to do this little clamshell, and I am going to squeeze all 4 shades on there just to provide some extra contrast. And I really like how that turned out with that B00 in the mix. And then I'm going to do the body of the round fish on the left. Again, just starting with the darkest and blending forward onto the face so that I can keep the face nice and light so you're still able to see all of those features. And as you can see, it didn't really make a difference whether I colored the rosy cheeks in before or after. You can still see them clearly either way. I did my last plant in this blue combo, again just kind of forcing myself to think outside the box since I'm limiting myself to this color palette. And then my final combo is going to be W00, E70, and E71, and that is going to be for my rocks. So the E70s are kind of like a grayish. They're a little bit gray and a little bit tan, and they almost have a hint of purple to them. So I think it worked really well with the rest of these shades. I think it just pulled the scene together and made it really unified. So I am going to start with the E71 on those rocks, blend out with the E70, and then I'm going to fill in with the W00. And I do have to work a little bit at making the W00 and the E70 blend together, but I love this combination. I think it's such a pretty one. Then I'm going to grab a black Sakura Jelly Roll pen, get that going off to the side, and I'll go over the eyes of all of the critters that have them open, just so that they're nice and bright and shiny again. I didn't like the way that the browned bluefish came out, so I'm going to let that dry and then take my Tombow Mono sand eraser and just very gently sand that pen away until it's gone. And then I'll go back over that eye once again, and then I will trim these images out with their matching dies. For my background, I'm starting with a piece of Bristol Smooth Surface Cardstock, and I'm going to blend on some Distress Oxide inks to create my ocean background. And I'm going to start with some speckled egg. I want this scene to be lighter in the center and then darker at the edges, so I'm starting with that lightest shade and just blending that on in kind of like an oval shape until I get a good amount of ink laid down. And since this is such a pale shade, it does take a little while to build up that color until I'm happy with the saturation level. Then I'll bring in Evergreen Bough, and I am going to put that on the top and the two sides. I'm not worried about the bottom edge because that's going to be covered up with an additional panel. But I'm just softly working my way around those outside edges. I don't want to lay down so much ink that it's too difficult to blend with the speckled egg. So I laid it in softly and then kind of built up the color around the edges. And then I'm going to work back and forth blending these two together. And I think these two shades are a good match for those BG markers that I used. So the speckled egg is very similar to the BG70 and the BG72, kind of that combo. And the Evergreen Bough is similar to the BG72 blended with the BG75, so more of the mid-tones. So once I'm happy with that, I'm going to distress it a bit, first with some plain water just spritzed onto an acrylic block so that I have more control when I tap it off with a thin paintbrush, and then I will blot that up with a paper towel. Since I kept the background pretty light, it didn't show up great, but there's still a little bit of that lightness in there. I'm also going to tap some of the speckled egg all over the background, and I'll just leave that to dry as is. And then I'll take some of the Evergreen Bough, mix that up, and tap that all over the background as well. And then I thought it would be fun to have a little bit of shimmer in the background. So I'm going to bring in my Gansai Tambi Starry Colors, which I haven't used in a while. But I'm going to use this pearlized shade and mix that up with some water and then tap that all over the background too, which gives it the look of some nice little bubbles. Then I'll set this panel aside to dry and work on my sand. For that, I took another piece of Bristol and trimmed that down with one of the Simple Stitch Hillside borders from Lawn Fawn. And I am going to add some Distress Oxide ink to this as well, starting with some antique linen at the top. I'm trying to keep this background light so that it matches with the coloring that I've done. I have a tendency to go for bold colors, so it really took some restraint here. But I did want to darken up the bottom a little bit, so I brought in some gathered twigs, which is not a super dark brown either. It's still kind of more a mid-tone, but I'm going to blend those two together once I have that laid in initially and just work that back and forth until I'm happy with that. And then I'm going to give this one the same treatment, spritzing it first with just some water. I'll let that soak in for about 30 seconds, and then I'm going to blot that up with my paper towel once again. And then I will add some of the antique linen mixed with some water just to loosen it up, make it a bit more fluid. I like having the mix of the light and dark specks in there, especially for the sand, because I think it looks a little bit more realistic with the texture. So I did the gathered twigs as well. And I wanted this to have a bit of sparkle too, so I'm going to go back to my Gansai Tambi Starry Colors, but this time I'm going to choose one of the gold shades and add a few little specks of that just by tapping that all over the background. And then I'll set this panel aside to dry. Then I'm going to work on my sentiment. I'll pop that card base into my Misty now that it is fully dry, and I'm going to stamp in VersaFine Onyx Black ink. And I'm using a combination sentiment. The Hope You Have a and Birthday is from the You Are Sublime stamp set, and the Fintastic is from Fintastic Friends. So I stamped that down a couple of times to make sure it was nice and bold, and then I'll set that aside. That ink does take a little while to dry as well. Then I'll pop my card base into my Misty. I'm using Lawn Fawn Lilac Cardstock, and I'm stamping in Shaded Lilac Distress Oxide ink, just because I thought that this was a good match for that colored cardstock, and I didn't have a regular dye ink that was similar. So I did Best Fishes from Fintastic Friends, the mermaid was from Mermaid for You, and the jellyfish from the Ocean Shell-fie stamp set. Then I'm going to take one of these little solid kelp or seaweed images from the Mermaid for You, and I'm going to stamp that across the bottom on both the left and the right. And I'm going to do it one extra time on the left just so it isn't too matchy-matchy. And then I'm also going to bring that in from the sides a little bit higher just to indicate the appearance of some more plant life and also kind of draw your eye toward the center of the scene. And then I'm going to take a solid fish image and I'm going to stamp that in some Pine Needles ink, which is a little bit darker than the Evergreen Bough. And I'm just going to add a whole bunch of fish in the background wherever I think they look good. So I'm stamping them all coming in from the left side. Originally I was going to have them coming in from both sides, but when you think about schools of fish, they usually are swimming in the same direction when it is the same kind of fish. So I decided to just have them all coming in from the left toward the right. Just made sure to stamp them all around the scene, just trying to fill that in and give a little bit of extra movement to the background. I added a few more tiny fish up at the top, and then I am going to add this focal panel to my card base, just gluing that on with my Barely Art Precision Craft Glue. And that focal panel is the same size as the front of the card. It's 4 1/4 by 5 1/2, so that it fits that standard A2 size card perfectly. And then I'll take my sand portion and I'm going to glue that down at the bottom, just making sure that those two corners are lined up. And then I can bring in my images. So the mermaid and the jellyfish are going to take center stage, be in the very middle of the card, but I don't want to glue them down just yet. I just want to put them there as a placeholder so that I can kind of build the lower part of the scene around them and make sure that nothing is going too high or isn't high enough. So just kind of figuring that out, and then once I have a general idea, I'm going to start gluing some things into place. So I'm going to add one of those little plants tucked behind the top edge of the sand, and then I'll add that large rock right below it. And I'll do the same thing with my octopus, using that as a placeholder, but not gluing it down just yet. So I can also kind of frame her in toward the bottom left of the card. So I'll add another little rock and tuck a plant behind that. I need to balance out the seaweed over on the far right at the top of the sand with another plant or something over on the left. So I tucked in that coral. I haven't glued it in yet because I just wanted to make sure that I'm spreading my colors around the scene a little bit. I tucked the pink one over next to the one on the right because I wanted that far away from the octopus since they are the same color. And then I tucked the blue one into this smaller rock with the other little seaweed. That way I can put the little blue crab over on the right and then the blue fish over at the top left, kind of creating a little bit of a triangle, but it just spreads the colors out throughout the scene so nothing is too close to one another. I tucked the tiniest rock behind the little crab, and then I'm going to go ahead and glue my octopus down and that other purplish coral as well. I have this little clamshell that I'm going to add in the center of the lower part of the sand to kind of fill in some of that space. And now I can go ahead and glue down my mermaid and my jellyfish. I wanted my mermaid to kind of accent the sentiment, so her head is right up near the largest part of that, and then the jellyfish is kind of tucked in between the Fintastic and the birthday. And then I'll add this little pearl crown to my mermaid's hair. And then I've got these tiny little angelfish, which I just love. And I'm going to add one into the empty space between the rock and the jellyfish. And then I was just trying to figure out the placement for the other two. And I could have gone with a lot of different options, but I decided to place it up near the sentiment. I knew I needed something there. And now I can go ahead and glue the large blue fish over on the left, again kind of accenting the sentiment. It's like all of the fish and the mermaid and the jellyfish are just kind of drawing you into the phrase. And then I've got one last little angelfish that I was trying to figure out where to place, but I wanted to make it look as if the sand and the sea are not separate from each other. So I decided to place that little fish down low, kind of overlapping the border of the sand. And then I've got one tiny little starfish left that I'm going to put over on the lower left corner. All that's left is to add a bit of sparkle, and since this is a mermaid card and we've got lots of fish scales going on, I went to town with the glitter. So I added it to my fish's little fins and the pink stripe on my angelfish. I also placed it on the little tentacles and the side of my jellyfish and to the spots on my octopus, and I put it on the starfish. I put it on my mermaid's tail, of course, and then also added it to her top and her little pearl tiara. And that is going to finish up this card. I really love the color palette of this one. I just want to make another one like right away with some different images, of course, but same color palette. I just really, really love it. So I'll lift that up so you can see all of the sparkle and shine and shimmer, and of course give you another peek at the inside. If you guys enjoyed this one too, please be sure to hit that like button and leave me a comment down below. I love to hear from you. Subscribe to my channel if you haven't already, and ring that notification bell if you want to be alerted when I post new videos. All of the products that I use will be listed and linked in the description bar below in case you'd like to pick up something for yourself. And if you'd like to keep watching, here are 2 extra videos I thought you might also enjoy. you can click on either one to check them out. Thank you so much for spending your time with me today. I hope you had a good one, and I'll see you in the next. Bye-bye.